Good afternoon. This is David Zavislin, the NV5 CAD Manager, and I'd like to welcome you to today's session in our continuing series of 2013 upgrade training. Today we'll be covering alignments, corridors, and sections. I've got quite a bit here, so hopefully we can get through this. I'm going to break up the presentation into these categories here, so I'm going to start off with alignments. And we're going to look at just the new features for 2013, and this is relative to 2011, so there actually be a few things here that also came out with 12, but since we skipped 12, I thought I would include them in this presentation. All right, I'm going to go through several bullet items first, and then I'll jump into Civil 3D, and we'll actually demonstrate and show you where these are located. First one I want to talk about just briefly is you can now specify what value to use for degree of curvature inside of Civil 3D. Prior versions all defaulted to 100 unit arc length or chord length for the various methods of calculating degree of curvature, which for those of us in the U.S. using imperial units was not that big a deal because our default unit is 100 feet for degree of curve. In other locations, like our Mexico City office when we had one, they used a 20-meter degree of curvature, which we were not able to set. So we can now set that inside of Civil 3D, and I'll show you in a little bit where that's located. Other things we're going to look at is we can now edit the constraints of segments in alignment, so we can change curves from free curves to floating curves or to fixed curves. Same thing with the tangents, and we'll look at some of the settings that allow us to do that. There is also a tangency check option now that will highlight for you any points on your alignment where the curves are not tangent to the incoming and outgoing line segments, so it helps you make sure that your model is put together correctly. We'll also look at a new feature where they will locate implied points of intersection on our alignment. So say we draw two tangents that don't intersect directly, we put a curve on it, we can have Civil 3D show us where that point of intersection will be located. They've also added in some new super elevation capabilities, and this kind of ties in also later on. We'll look at corridor modeling and our assemblies. They're using now what's called an axis of rotation setting, and we use that when we define our super elevation and also in our sub-assemblies. They have a new sub-assembly type that will take advantage of this, and you'll see the name AOR on that, so I put that on there because I could never remember what that stands for. It stands for axis of rotation, so we'll look how that's set up and how that is controlled. And then the last thing for alignments that we'll look at is they have a new railway alignment object, which will have some new properties where we, instead of applying super elevation, you can apply what they term in railway design as cant, C-A-N-T, which is the rail equivalent of super elevation. So we'll take a brief look at that, and then later on we'll also show you the rail subassembly that they have created for that also. All right, well, let me switch over to some drawing files here. There we go, I'm with that file here. So we're going to start off and we'll look at some of the alignment features here. I'm going to talk initially about the degree of curvature, and we get to that through our settings tab. I'm going to right click on my drawing name, and it's in the drawing settings. And these are new settings for Civil 3D. And up the top, right below General, there is a new category here called Degree of Curvature, and this is where you can then specify what the unit length is, either for chord calculations for degree of curvature or if you're doing it by arc. Right, so that is a new feature. I think for most of us, we probably won't use that because I know, again, in the United States, our default setting is 100 unit degree of curvature calculation. But if you ever have to change that, you can now modify that. All right, so that's all I want to show now. So that's degree of curvature. Now I want to talk about alignment tangency constraints. So when you create alignment, we usually create our tangent segments point to point. Those would be fixed. And then we would add what are called floating curves. And I have an example here of this alignment. So if I change where my endpoint is located on my tangent, my curve will maintain tangency. Excuse me, when I change the endpoint of my line segment, my curve segment will stay tangent to that. So as I move that around, you'll see that stays put. Same thing if I adjust the radius of my arc, you'll see that it does extend in the tangents, and the arc length will adjust, maintaining that tangency. All right, and that's kind of the default. But there are going to be situations where maybe I want to hold this segment and I want the arc to be tangent at this end, but then I want this segment to stay with my arc, and we can then modify and change these objects to be free segments where they're tangent on one end and some kind of constraint on the other. In 2011, to do that, you had to anticipate that when you created the alignment, you would have to construct it that way. Well, in 13 now, we can go in after the fact and modify that. So let me show you how that's done. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my alignment properties. And on my alignment properties, I want to point out there's a new tab here called constraint editing. And there's two options here. The first one here is perform implied tangency constraint swapping. I'm going to turn that on. What that'll do then is if I change this fixed arc segment to be a a floating segment to a 3-point fix. Let me get that terminology correct. So right now it's floating. I'm going to change it to fixed. It will automatically change these two tangent segments to be free, where they will then maintain tangency. If I turn that off, when I change this from floating to fixed, these two tangent lines, or these two line segments, will stay as fixed. So we'll see if I can show both of those. So I'm going to turn that on. This other option here, lock all parameter constraints, those are for when you have fixed or free segments and there's some kind of parameter like arc length or radius or pass-through point, it will lock and maintain that constraint. Okay, we can go in through the editors and we can unlock those. This is just kind of the default for all segments, that they will then be locked once we modify them. So let's take a look at how this behaves now. All right, so I'm going to come in here, I'm going to right-click on my alignment, and I'm going to edit the alignment geometry. And I have it locked. Let me try it again here. So edit. All right, it tells me I've got that probably open in another file. Nope. All right, bear with me here as I get through that. So let me see if it'll let me do it now. It's going to be one of those days. Sorry, I have to close my files down. All right. Get it all working during practice, and then you come in here and it doesn't want to behave. So let me reopen it. Something I did on my system there, I've got my toolbar is locked. And I usually see that if I have multiple drawings open, and I actually have that toolbar open in another drawing file. So let me just close down and I'll come back in, make sure I have a clean session of Civil 3D running here. All right, so back on that, so I'm going to right-click, edit geometry. Now I got my buttons. All right, I'm not sure what's going on there, so I'm going to use the sub-entity editor here. So I'm going to click on that. And I'm going to select that arc segment, and then we're going to see is this is a free segment, and the new feature here is I can now modify that. So I can either change it to a fixed, where it's going to be a 3-point arc, or I can do floating curves where it's either constrained by the preceding segment or the following segment. All right. So right now we are free, so I'm going to change it to fixed. This parameter constraint lock, that's that toggle that we saw in the alignment properties. So that's automatically set, but you see I can go to any segment and I can turn that off. So now I can change how my parameter is constrained. So if I lock that, so I'll set that back to locked, you'll see I can't change the constraint. I'm not really sure why they did that or what the purpose is. I think so if you're switching from segment to segment, we can now keep track of that. All right, we also had in the alignment properties, I had it set up to automatically adjust tangency for adjacent segments. So I changed this one to a fixed 3-point curve. When I select then my line segments coming in, you'll see that it is no longer fixed, but it is now floating, constrained by the next object. And then when I pick this tangent up here, this line segment, you'll see that's constrained by the previous. So it's swapped out. It's going to maintain tangency. But now when I edit this, you'll see I can modify the curves here. And let me move this around, and we'll see that the tangent segments are adjusting to accommodate this change in my curves. So as I move these around, we'll see that those tangents are now going to warp and stretch to adjust to the curve, whereas before the tangents controlled and then the curves would adjust tangency to match, or the curve would adjust the radius to match that new tangency. All right, so that is being able to map constraints. Let me come in here and do that again. So I'm going to pick my subentity, and I'll change that back to a free, so it will be both sides are free now. And now when we pick on the line segments, we'll see it change those back to being fixed. So now if I modify this, we'll see again, if I change my curve now, it's just going to modify the radius, maintain tangency, or I can move my tangent segments, and we'll see that the curve is now adjusting to maintain that. So that's kind of the default. The other option we could do here is, let me pick on this guy here and just kind of show you some of that, and maybe change this to constrained by previous, and then this one here, it will then be constrained by previous, and then the first one should just be not constrained. Right, so now when I edit, I can come in, I can grip edit, and I can pull this point here, and we'll see that the other two, that's too dramatic, will update or adjust to match, or I can take my curve and shift these around, and they will all update. All right, let me set those back to their original values I had. So again, I want my curve to be free, and then I'll just check my tangent. So this one should now be not constrained, and that one's not constrained. All right, so let's look at the properties again. So I'm going to go back into my alignment properties. This time I'm going to turn off this implied tangency, and then now when I edit my arc segment and changed it to be fixed, and we'll see that these line segments are also fixed. So it did not swap the tangency to the adjacent segments. So that was that option under settings. Let me hit escape. I'm going to go ahead and close that down. I'm done editing. So I've left this now. I've got my alignment set up where all three segments, the two lines and the arc, are all fixed. So now when I grip edit, you'll see I can pull my arc and I can get a bulge on here. It's no longer maintaining tangency. All right, so we can modify that. Being that it's not tangent, maybe I gripped it and maybe a little bit more precise like that. There you go. You ever get one where, yep, that looks tangent? Okay, we use the old rubber band ruler. What we can do also now in our alignment properties is, let me select my alignment here, and I didn't get it. And go to alignment properties. Under our Design Criteria tab, they've added this section down here where we can now check for tangency. And what's going to do, it's just going to put little icons on the screen wherever I have non-tangent points on my alignment. So we'll pick OK to that, and we'll see it does highlight for me where those two tangency locations are broken. And I usually saw this a lot when I'm bringing, maybe converting polylines to an alignment. Maybe whoever constructed the polyline didn't draw one of the segments correctly, and it's going to create your alignment using all fixed points. Right. The way I can fix this then is go back into our Edit Alignment Geometry. I'll come in here, use my sub-entity editor. I will pick the, that's delete. Good job. Let me try that one again. Sub-entity editor. Sometimes I talk and don't look where I'm picking. All right. And what I'll do is I'll change this back to free, which will then force it to be tangent to these segments. And then I just need to clean up my radius and set that back to 200. And I've now got my alignment back to what we started with. All right. So hopefully you saw wasn't too confusing there, but just wanted to show you the capabilities of being able to modify the tangency constraint of an object after you've created the alignment. I think that's very powerful. And then also the tangency error message or tangency checking to indicate where I have points that are no longer tangent. All right. Next I want to look at is the implied point of intersection. The way I've drawn this alignment is my tangent or line segments go from start to end, and then the second segment I drew from start to end. So they don't actually intersect, so we're not seeing any kind of PI point here. All right, well, I'm going to go into the Alignment Properties command for this alignment. And there's another new tab on here called Point of Intersection. So this is new. And the default is don't display implied points. But then there's two methods to calculate it. For my alignment right now, both methods are going to give you the same result. And what this is for is if you have a compound curvature, either spiral curve or curved curve, curve reverse curve, if you do it with this one, you'll get a single point of intersection based on the change in direction, in and out. Or you can do it by individual curves. So in this case, where I have a spiral curve, this will show the PI for the spiral, and it'll show the PI for the curve. Whereas this method up here will show you just a single PI relative to where the two tangent segments would intersect. Okay, and that's probably the way I would work mostly, is I want to see where the overall PI is for the group, spiral curve, spiral group. So we'll go ahead and pick OK to that, and what you'll see now is it will put in a little marker for me, and that's controlled by the style. There is now, if I take a look at this here and go into my Edit Style, and I look at my Marker tab, there is a new marker. Where'd that go? And of course, oh, right there, point of intersections using the delta, and then let's make sure what I have there. So it is using a point of intersection symbol here. Okay, and it will place it. But then now when I select my alignment, you'll see that it does show me the extended tangents. Right? I can still grip at it individually. Okay. However, if I'd like to join them up, what I can do is I can place my cursor on that PI point, and I can tell it to solve the PI. So I get a grip menu for that. So let me pick on that grip menu. And what it'll do then is it'll actually extend the two tangents to that new point of intersection. And you'll see I just get my radius. So now I can grip at it and adjust both of those tangents simultaneously. So that is implied. So let me undo that. There we go. So I'm back now to just showing the implied PI. And then I'll go back into my alignment properties. And if I don't want to see those, I just can set my point of intersection option back to do not display. And now I'll see it's just going to show me my curve and my line segments. Right, so that's the super elevation axis of implied PI. Sorry. Next topic, super elevation axis of rotation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my alignment. I'm going to go into the super elevation calculator here. Go ahead and tell it to calculate. And the new feature here is you're going to see this pivot method. In 2011, the pivot was actually controlled by the assembly and which sub-assemblies you used. So we would do the lane outside super sub-assembly, and then one of the properties that we would set is where's the pivot point? Is it left, right, inside, outside? In 2013, this is all now done through the super elevation properties that you assign to the alignment. Okay, so let me show you just some of the options here. For an undivided crowned road here, we can say always do the inside a curve, outside a curve, which is look the same, or we can say always pivot about the left side, whether or not it's the inside or outside, and then we can also set it same thing for the right side. Typically, road design, we're going to use center and baseline. If you do an undivided planar road, same options, but then you can also specify where the high side, low side is. Divided crown, again, same thing. You get pivot methods, and then planar with divided. You get all these various options for specifying where the pivot location is. When we look at assembly definition under the corridor portion of this presentation, I will point out now that you have to apply a similar category to the assembly. So the assembly type has to match the method that we're using here to calculate super elevation. I cannot apply an undefined plane or undivided, planar assembly to an undivided crowned roadway. It'll get lost. It'll get confused on that. Right, so that's the axis of rotation pivot method, so I'm going to leave that one there. And then the other thing I want to point out just for super elevation calculations, they have added in separate slope treatments for low side and high side. In 2011, you had just a single slope treatment for your shoulder, and it applied at both low and high. So now we can go through and tell it whether to use the default slopes from the calculations to match the lane slope, or do what's called a breakover removal, where it's going to adjust your shoulder to match your lane, and we'll actually do an adjustment on that. And then for the high side, you can either do a default or you can match the lane. If you do a default slope, you then have an option to set a maximum rollover, and that just keeps you from getting too drastic of a grade break on the high side. What it'll do is once that grade break between your travel lane and your shoulder hits 8% in this case, it will start to adjust the grade of the shoulder as well, and it'll roll it up to match. All right. So I'm not going to finish this. I just want to point out the settings. If I hit finish, it'll go through and it'll calculate all of the critical stations for my super elevation based on these settings here. So again, different options here for low side and high side, and then what we saw is we have the different pivot methods that we can now assign to tell it where you're going to pivot when we super elevate our model. So kind of jumping ahead here. All right, and the last thing I want to talk about in alignments is the rail alignments. So let me jump back over to my railway drawing here. So I have a file. I have just a real simple alignment I threw in, and just a couple things I want to point out in here. And I've already built the corridor on here, so let me zoom in and select the alignment. I'm going to go into my alignment properties. And just want to point out that there is a new alignment type here, and it's called a rail alignment. And by setting this as a rail alignment, what will happen then is when I select it, you'll see that instead of having a super elevation calculation tool, I've got a cant calculation tool. So let's go into calculate, edit, cant. Try Google searching that sometime, and it's going to want to put the apostrophe in because it doesn't understand what a cant is. All right. And we can come into our cant wizard here and go through, and you can specify, again, pivot method for your rail, and then also you have the track width. This is actually coming from the alignment properties. I can't edit this here. I don't do a lot of rail design. Actually, I've never done rail design. Let me rephrase that. I'm a little confused by this because most railway, the width is specified based on the gauge of the railway, which is measured inside rail to inside edge of rail. And in this dialog and in the alignment definition, they're actually doing center to center. So it's a little confusing. If you look at US gauge, it's not 4.9 feet, it's like 4.8. I forgot the exact unit here. So you do have to do a little conversion knowing what your rail top width is. So not real expert on that. But just kind of want to point out what can be done here. And then if you've done railway, you've got your equilibrium and your maximum cant deficiency where it'll calculate. It's all based on a design criteria file, very similar to the super elevation criteria files that we've used for super elevation design. All right, I'm not going to show much more here. Like I said, I haven't done any railway design. Just want to make you aware that this capability is here. And then we'll also zoom out. I've got some sub-assemblies or assemblies in here. So here's what that's not the railway. There it is. So here's what the basic rail assembly looks like, and then it'll show you the rail, the ties, ballast, and sub-ballast is capable on that. And you have various controls over the width and thicknesses of these different layers. And then I've applied that and have built in my corridor here. Let me just do a quick view on here. It's got multiple stuff selected. And we'll look at our section editor here. So we can see what we end up with our typical section for this design. All right, that's all I'm going to show on rail. If you would like to learn more about that, or if you get a project where you need that, I encourage you, get in touch with me. I will help you and learn it with you to work through these different options here. All right, let me jump back into my PowerPoint now. Our next topic is going to be looking at the corridors themselves, and I've broken this up into two sections. We're going to start off looking at assemblies and sub-assemblies, and then we'll look at the corridors, and actually there's a third section. Let me clarify that, and then we'll also look at the corridor section editor, where they seem to have put in a lot of the improvements or updates for 2013. All right, a couple things we're going to look at in terms of assemblies and sub-assemblies. They have improved the assembly creation process. They've added in a little bit more intelligence. A couple of things they've done is they now have name templates for the groups. So when you do the left side and the right side, instead of naming them Group 1 and Group 2, it automatically will label them left and right. Same thing with our sub-assembly names. There's a little bit better enhanced naming capability in that. We'll also see that the software is now smart enough to know the difference between the left side and the right side. So if I attach, say, a curb subassembly to a pavement subassembly, it will automatically set the left or right parameter based on what I'm connecting it to. So if I attach it to a left lane, it will be left. I attach it to a right lane, it will be right. Okay, so that's kind of nice. There's also some additional insertion options when we add assemblies. We can replace existing sub-assemblies. We can also insert, and we'll try to show all those in just a little bit here. There's a select similar command. So as you work on your model and you have 3 or 4 assemblies with similar lane or curb or sidewalk, we can select them all very quickly and modify common parameters. I'll show you that one a little bit as well. And then we talked a little bit about the axis of rotation. There is a new lane subassembly called Lane Super Elevation AOR, which stands for axis of rotation. This replaces the lane outside and lane inside super elevation subassemblies. This one is used in both those conditions. It has a parameter where you set whether it's using the inside or the outside lane super elevation. And what this will do then is it highlights these little yellow flags indicating where the potential axis of rotation points are on the subassembly, and it will then read that or use the appropriate one based on the based on the super elevation parameters assigned to our alignment. Okay, so a little bit confusing. In the past, in 2011, you'd actually tell the lane outside or the lane inside where the pivot point was. In 2013, now again, as we saw in the super elevation controls, that's all controlled by the super elevation. All right, and then we also saw that there's a new rail subassembly. All right, again, let me jump back over to my drawing here. So what I'm going to do is, let's start off, I'm going to create a subassembly here, and I've got a couple sample ones here, and we're just going to create a new one that looks like these guys here. So I'm going to go into my Home tab, and we're going to go Assembly, I'm going to create. All right. Here's where we need to specify the assembly type. And this is, again, a new feature going along with that super elevation control parameters. This needs to match what we've assigned to our roadway. So in this case, I have an undivided crown road. I'm going to make sure that's the type I assign to my subassembly. If you're not using super elevation, you can get away with just using this other parameter here. And then you also see if we're doing railway design, we need to tell it it's a railway assembly, so it knows to go look for the cant parameters as opposed to the super elevation parameters. So I'm going to go with that. Make sure I got the right style. We'll click OK to that. I'm just going to put it in right here below my other ones. All right, and then we're ready to add in some assemblies. So I'm going to first bring up properties because I'll need that, and then my toolbar, my tool palette with all my assemblies. And I'm going to add in my lane. So again, they've replaced the outside and inside super subassemblies with this one called Lane Super Elevation AOR. So let me expand that. So what I'll do is axis of rotation is supported. There's my side, there's my width. My slope direction, I want to make sure I'm going away from crown. I want the crown point, that's fine. I'll go ahead and I'll add that in. So we're going on the right side. Initially, I do need to specify left side, so I can then pick my assembly and add one to the left. Let me quickly show in the assembly properties now that default naming, my groups are now named right and left. So instead of having to come back in later and rename these, it's doing that for me. So that's real nice that it did that. All right. So moving along now, I'm going to add in some curb to this. Let me go into my curb. We'll do the urban curb. And the only thing I want to change here is I don't want this sub-base extension, so I'll set that to 0. And what we'll do is I'll zoom in, I'll put one on the right, puts it to the right, and then without changing this parameter here, you'll see it's actually set to left. I can come in and pick the left side, but it got them both correct. It does not try to put a left one on the right side. So if I hit escape and I select this one, we'll see that it was smart enough to know, hey, you put this on the right side, we're going to change that side property to the right. All right, let me put on some sidewalk, and we'll set this in. We'll put some boulevard width on here. And again, it will set the side automatically based on what I'm connecting it to. And then we'll finish up, we'll match the other one. We'll put some daylight, I'll do a max width on here. I've got 4 to 1s, and we'll do max width of, say, 30 feet. Just make it a little different, and I'll grab that. And again, I don't have to specify the side because it's going to get the side from the piece that I'm attaching it to. All right, so real nice process, makes that a lot quicker and simpler. Some of the other features we have in here, say we want to throw something else in here. Say we want to put another lane in here. I'm going to come back in and do my super elevation AOR. I'm going to throw one to the right side. Again, I don't have to do this, but what I can do now is on the command line, you'll notice now that I have options to either insert it or replace one. So if I want to insert one, I'm going to pick on the insert option, and it's going to ask me now to select the subassembly to insert after. Or I can say, no, I want to pick the one I want to put before. Well, if I want to put it after my pavement here, I can just pick on that one, and it will then insert that, and it will shift all the other sub-assemblies over. Whereas in the prior versions, what you'd have to do is you'd have to put it in the right location, then you'd have to select the other ones, right-click, and do the move to put it in that correct location. All right, if I look at my assembly construction now, we'll come in here at our assembly properties, and we'll see that it does have them all in the correct order here. So it did insert that before. Okay, so real nice feature. We can also replace. So I don't know. Let's see if I can find. We'll throw the parabolic one in here. This time I'll do the replace option, and I'll select the one I just put in, and we'll see it will replace that. Okay, it looks like it messed up. It looks like that one probably not a good example, because that one it wants to match it back to center line. So, but it does. The lane parabolic spans both sides. It's not a right or left one, so that's why it did that. I'll go ahead and erase that. It'll shift everything back in the right order. Okay, so again, when I add my assemblies now, I do have, come on, let me pick on there, we will have the options to either insert it or to replace another assembly with the one that we're putting in. You know, if I do a replace, maybe I'll throw it on here, we'll replace that one. So I've replaced the curb now with the lane section, or I can come back in and say, you know, let's put curve back on that piece. Of course, come on, scroll E, set an extension back to 0, and then again I'll replace that and put that back in. All right, so I hope you can see some of the improved workflows for that. The other thing we can do here is say we want to modify. I notice that my pavement sections are all different widths here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select one of them. I'm going to right-click, and here's that select similar sub-assemblies. It will grab all of them. So now I can come in and say, you know, let's put in a width of 16 for all of these. Okay, that's what those were. So maybe let's try, you know, 20. And I can modify all of my assemblies simultaneously just by quickly selecting similar. Excuse me. So let me change that back. You know, maybe I want to make them a little bit steeper, so we can do -4, and we can modify them all at once. So same thing. You know, maybe I want to modify all my sidewalks. So I'll say select similar, and I'll change maybe my boulevard widths all to 0. And that way I have all my sidewalk tucked into the back, and maybe same thing, the outside, we'll set that to 0. So now those all match, and they're all identical. Real nice tool, again, just makes it easy to edit them fairly quickly there. All right, so that's subassembly creation. Let me jump back into the PowerPoint here. And looks like I need to pick up my pace just a little bit here. All right, so now moving along, corridor features. And let's look at the corridor itself. There's an improved corridor creation workflow, and we'll see instead of having to do the create simple or create corridor and then have to go and pan and pick and do a bunch of stuff, they've combined them both into a single dialog that's much quicker and easier to use. And the other thing, we're going to see that if I change an assembly in 2011, I would have to remember to go back in and remap all of my targets. So if you used alignments to control widths, or I had target surfaces for daylight, I would have to go and remap those if I ever swapped out an assembly. All right, now we're going to see is as long as my assembly has similar sub-assemblies, it will automatically map and retain those targets. Let's jump in and take a look at that. So what we're going to do is I'm going to create a corridor model down my alignment here, so we're no longer messing with sub-assemblies here. So I'm going to go to my corridor now, and you'll see there's only a single command here, and it is the corridor command. There's no longer a drop down here to create a simple or create corridor. So I'm going to select on that, And I get now this dialog, which basically gives me a single location to do all of my corridor definitions, so much quicker. I'm not going to worry about the style. I will name it after my alignment. There's my alignment. I need to pick the profile. I need to pick which assembly. And then I can also, at this point, specify my target surface. So this is the one I usually always have to go in because I have daylighting on almost every assembly. I would then have to go into the target parameters. All right. If you want this to be like the Create Simple corridor, we can turn off this set baseline and region parameters, and boom, it's going to build my corridor. If I want to go in and modify my frequencies or do other targets besides the surface, I can turn this parameter on, and it will then bring up my parameters dialog where I can then go edit those. I'm going to go ahead for now. I'm going to turn that off, so this will be nice, quick, and simple. And the whole process is real quick. Unless you're talking like I am, it does slow you down a little bit. All right, so that's a real nice improved workflow. All right, let's take a look at our targets here. So I'm going to come into my corridor properties, go to the parameters, and I'm just going to set all targets, and we'll see right now all of our surfaces, our target surfaces are going to E01, so that was set. Right. If we modify something, let's change our assembly here. And I'm going to do, there's a version of it where there's no curb or sidewalk on the right side. We'll pick OK to that and pick OK to that and tell it to rebuild. And what we'll see is it is still daylighting correctly on the left side. So if I look at the properties, and again, look at all my targets, we'll see that even though I changed the assembly, it is still mapping my surfaces to that target, or my targets to the E01 surface here. All right, so real nice feature. Saves me a lot of time of having to go back in and remember, oh, I got to remap my targets if I change an assembly here. So I'll pick OK to that. I'll put the road. If we come back into set, we'll see it did retain that, hey, all daylight targets were going to E01, so it automatically sets them all back to E01 for me. Okay, again, I'll rebuild that, and now you'll see that I get both left and right. All right, so real neat functionality. I'm going to do a little bit of editing here real quick. I'm going to split my regions in here, and I'm going to add in a section for our next presentation. I'm going to split my region right there. What I'm going to do is, and we'll split that one right there. So now I have multiple regions, and then what I want to do is I'm going to delete that middle region there. All right, so I just wanted to put a gap because what I'm going to do is we're going to look at the section editor now, and one of the things we can do in the section editor is add regions from within the section editor. All right. So again, just wanted to show for basic corridors that there's an improved workflow for creating it, and then as or if we change assemblies, it does a real good job in remapping all of our targets for us. All right. So let's look now at the section editor, and this seems to be where they spent most of their effort in 2013 in enhancing the corridor modeling process. Okay, a couple things, just real minor stuff we're going to see is the grid now. They have what's called an adaptive grid where it will actually resize the grid spacing as we zoom in and out. Where in prior versions you just said, I want a 10 by 10 grid, so if you zoom way out, the grid gets real dense. So this will actually adjust the grid on the fly as we zoom in and out. We'll also see that there are now some viewport configuration capabilities where I can set up multiple viewports and assign views to be plan, profile, or section. And then along with that, they have what's called a station slider, which will show me where my section is in the plan view and the profile view, but I can actually grip edit those and adjust what section I'm working at by sliding them back and forth in either the plan view or the profile view. So that's a real neat tool for getting to where I need to be to edit. In terms of editing, a couple of things we're going to see is we can now add regions to areas of our corridor model where there currently is not a region. We cannot split regions or edit region lengths inside the section editor. That's still best suited to do in Plan View with the Plan View commands, but we can add regions, and we'll show you how to do that. So that's why I put that gap in my corridor model, so I can come in here and add a region. We can also set targets from the section editor. So in the past, we always had to go either into the corridor properties, or we would have to use that right-click region menu to be able to specify targets, but we can do that right inside the section editor now. And then the last thing we'll look at in the section editor is we can also display other Civil 3D objects. So in the past, we could only see our corridor in our surface sections, and I've got a drawing I'll bring up with parcels and pipes, and we can see all of that while we're working on it in the section editor. Okay, so let me jump back into my sample drawing. So first thing I'm going to do is let me pick on my corridor, and I'll bring up my corridor ribbon tab, and we're going to look at the section editor now. So I'm going to start off by going into the options first before I even specify anything. And I just want to point out that I do have that adaptive grid option turned on. Again, that's going to size my grid spacing based on how I zoom in and out on my section view. And I just want to check to make sure I had a good code set assigned here. Right. We can also set our viewport configuration here. Right now I have just a single viewport, and it has to be assigned section view, otherwise it won't work. So we'll come back and we'll change that. So we'll go into the section editor. All right, so it went into the section based on where I selected my corridor model. So I came in at 1075, and we can use our buttons here to step back forward and backwards here. They do have these buttons where we can jump now directly to the beginning of a region. All right, so that took me, my two regions are at 0 and then at 10 plus 0, 0. So I can jump back and forth, and then 8 is where the other region ended. And we can use these to step back and forth. This adaptive grid, you'll see as I zoom out, the grid keeps resizing. As I zoom in, it will then keep resizing based on that zoom scale. So you can see right now I've got a 1-by-1 grid, even though if I look at my options, my defaults are set, show me 10 by 10. With the adaptive turned on, they will resize based on where I am as I zoom in and out. Okay. Well, let's look now at the viewport configuration. I find it's real nice to be able to have both either a plan view and my cross-section view, or both the plan and profile along with this. So let's go into our configuration command here. And I'm going to change this, and I'm going to do, let's do 3. We'll put 1 above. Right. So what I'll do is my viewport 1, which is above, I will set that to plan. Viewport 2, which is this one here, I will set that to profile. And then viewport 3, I will set to section. All right, I have to set at least one of them to section view, or I can't do the section editor. I can also control the split here. All right, so for example, I'd like to see a little bit more room for my profile. I can say, well, let's set that maybe to 60%, and we'll see it'll shift that over to where this viewport's going to be 60% of the screen. This one's only going to be 40. So let me pick OK to that. All right, so now in my editor, and it works a little bit better if you have a larger monitor than I have my laptop configured for GoToWebinar here. So it's a little tough to see, but right now we're going to see I'm at section 7 plus 50. We can see it up on our toolbar here, and it'll show me the little slider line in plan view, and it also shows me where that is in profile view. So let me kind of step back, and we'll see as I walk back in my corridor, or my corridor section editor here, we'll see that those tracker lines will slide along with it. Okay. I can also grip edit those. So let me come into plan view, and I can now grip and pull it back and say, well, show me there. And it'll now take me, so that's 2 plus 75. Let me grip it again, and I'll slide it maybe to where I don't have anything going on in my corridor. Okay, now we can go up to there. Can do the same thing in the profile view. I can select that tracker line, grip edit, and then slide it to whichever section I want to be editing, and it'll update in both views. Again, makes it real nice for me to see where it is I'm working, or what data I'm working, or what location I'm working at while I'm in my section editor. Okay. Because I've got such a small monitor, I'm actually going to tweak this a little bit. I'm just going to go 2 vertical views, and I'll set them back to 50%. And I want to go plan in section view, so that gives me a little bit more room to work here. All right, so what I'd like to do now is show you the add region command. And a couple things you're going to see on the toolbar here, they've got this little button that expands down, and you can control which stations it's showing you. So right now we're seeing all the baseline stations for this alignment, but if I want to do just the ones that are in a region, come in here and we'll see it stops at 800 and then skips on to 10 plus 00. That's the gap I put in here. Okay. Well, if I want to modify the area where I have a gap, I can say, well, just show me the non-region stations, and it will then only show me those stations that are within this gap. Okay. On the toolbar, I now have a button here to add a region. So I'll go ahead and select the Add Region command. And this one works nice with both a plan view and a section view, because it actually wants me to go out and pick where the region is located. Okay, the option is either to pick 2 points, or I can pick the fill option that we see on the command line, and that will then fill it all the way through. So I'm just going to pick. So I'll come in here in plan view. And you'll see now I get a little slider that goes along with my crosshair. So I can say, well, I want to go from there, and I can now stretch it to a location there. It's going to name my region, and I can tell it which assembly I want to use. So this one I'm going to add in that daylight, or excuse me, the one without curb sidewalk or daylight on the right. So we'll pick OK to that. It will then ask me to map my targets, so I need to tell it to daylight to E01. And we'll pick OK to that, and excuse my error. So I'll now add that region in. Okay, so a nice quick way to add that, where in the past I'd have to close out of the editor, go into plan view, select my corridor, right click, and then do the modify split region or add region command here. Okay, so I can do that directly from my section editor. Okay. The other thing we can do from the section editor is we can add targets. So what I'm going to do now is, in plan view, I've got this polyline. I'm going to actually pull my pavement out, and I'm going to widen it. So I'm going to pick on my assembly, and what we'll see is we get grips where each subassembly is inserted. So if I come over here and say hover on my daylight, you'll see it shows me, I can either edit the parameters for that subassembly, or I can change the target. So I have the target for the surface, in this case a target for an offset alignment. This is a width, max width daylight subassembly, so that's why it has an alignment option. All right, so I can come in here, hover on that, and I could pick here and then select a different target. For my lanes, they both left and right have a common insertion point, so the grip menu is a little different. I can't pick just the target right and target left. I get a shared targets command, which is right here, and that will then bring up my target mapping, but it's only showing me these 2 sub-assemblies. You can see I'm getting width for right and left and outside elevation for right and left. Right, well, I want to modify the width. I want to target a polyline. I will pick that in my drawing file, and it will then apply that. Let me click OK, rebuild. It will then apply that throughout that entire region. So just a nice way, instead of, again, having to close down the section editor to be able to go and edit my targets, I can do that directly from the menu here. Last thing I want to look at for the section editor has to do with displaying civil 3D objects, and I've got a little bit better drawing here. It has a little bit more information in it. All right, so I've got this model here. This is a roadway alignment with a corridor, and I also have all the adjacent parcel model built, and if we zoom in here, we'll see that there is a pipe network here, a storm drain network modeled in my roadway. All right, So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my corridor, and we're going to do the corridor section editor. So in my section view, you'll see that there's a lot of additional information that we haven't seen in the past. These green lines represent my right-of-way lines, or the edge of my parcels, and actually there's a, if I pan over here, there's intersecting another parcel. That's probably the rear or side lot line. If we would switch this to maybe 2 views here, and we'll do plan and section here. Okay, so we can kind of get an idea. In that viewport, so we can see where we are. So it's showing me where it intersects that line there, and if I keep going, it'll show me. So there's where it's intersecting my boundary. So anything radial to that section, it will show it to me. It also shows me all of the feature lines that were generated off my corridor model. So I'm actually going to turn that off, and it's all controlled through this command here called display objects. It will bring up a dialog. It'll show me points, point groups, and then I can turn off by feature type. So for example, if I turn off the feature lines, okay, all those little magenta markers go away. So that makes it a little bit easier to see. All right, so let me zoom out actually a little bit, and then what we'll do is we'll walk up our alignment, and then as I hit, and I'm now intersecting this manhole structure here, it'll actually show me that structure in the section view. And as we keep walking our way along, now we see the structure of the pipe, and as we step along, we'll see that we get just the pipe. Okay, so real neat tool. I'm in my intersection now, and one of the things I want to point out, and we'll talk a little bit in the final slide that I have for my corridors, is that it now can generate sections through portions of a corridor model that are not radial to my baseline. So this section here is, you'll see it's only going from this point across to here because that's the baseline I'm on. So it's really only this section of our corridor here, but it's still able to show me the corridor elements coming off this curb return baseline that I've used to model this curb return. All right, so we kind of just keep stepping through here. So that's why it's not centering. It's centering it based on my baseline. Okay. And once I get through that intersection, it goes back in. Now my assembly is going the full width here. Okay, got a little glitch here. This model was originally built in 2011, so I do need to make some adjustments and update my model. For 2012, it does get a little bit confused there. All right, so we are seeing the full thing. I can grip at it. Let me grab this. Come maybe down. Got some structures here that are real. We'll pop it in right there. All right, so now I'm at where I've got a manhole. I'm just outside the manhole, so my pipe is offset just a little bit. But it's showing me my 2 inlet structures. So real neat. If I don't want to see any of that, again, I go in the objects here and say, we'll turn off pipes. And now my pipes are off. Or I can come in here and say, we'll turn off structures, maybe turn off parcels. And now we're seeing what we're used to seeing just in 2011. Let me turn these back on. And then I also want to point out now is for our objects, if I grab, come over here and edit my style here. So I'm going to edit the structure style. Is most of the objects now have a section view direction, and this controls then what you're going to see while you're in the editor. It's going to control the color, whether or not you see any hatching and how that's hatched. So it is using the section view component of the object style. All right, so let me close that down. Doing good here. Let me jump back into the PowerPoint. And then I got one last slide here looking at our sections. And that's what I briefly showed you in the corridor section editor, is that Civil 3D is now able to display corridor shapes, and I need to highlight the word shapes. It won't show links, it does show shapes from other baselines and more explicitly from other corridors. So let me jump back into Civil 3D here, and I've got one more file. This is a model. This is from a project that Walnut Creek had done a couple years ago. It's a highway design where they were doing some exit ramps, and they've actually have a little overpass and some lanes that weave between these, and it's several different corridor models. I think there's 4 corridors in this model, and I've XREF'd those into this cross-section drawing. There we go. So in plan view, so we've got our cross-section showing all of our corridors. And what I've done is I've data referenced this alignment, and I've created a single section view, which now appears here. In 2011, in order for this section view to work, grab my sample line, is the sample line had to line up exactly at the corridor section in order to show the corridor in the section view. Well, in 2013, I can now drag that anywhere, and it doesn't matter where I drag this to, it will be able to generate this section view. Okay. I can also change the angle, and it will update and show me all of the components that I drag that through. You know, so maybe I want to do a section through some culvert going through at some odd angle. I am now able to do that. We're no longer limited, or no longer have to create a whole series of surfaces from our corridor models in order to get that data to show up in our section view. Let me zoom out a little bit. So let me grab this now, and I'm going to lengthen it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually drag it across all these other corridor models, and what it'll do then is it'll actually update the section view, and it will show me the shapes from each of these corridors. Okay, and the reason I've got a few gaps in here is I do have either some daylight elements that are only using a single link, so the link's not showing up, or in this case I may not have actually put that into the model just yet. It's kind of a complex model. This is not the final version. This is just a copy I took of it to kind of work on some concepts and processes here. And again, it's all dynamic, so as I drag my sample line, it will update and show me all the different pieces here. You know, so we're almost back to the abutment, and then we get to here where we're no longer a bridge shape. Our weave lane has merged over. I can keep working my way down the alignment here. I may have to zoom this out, pull it out further to see the whole thing. Okay, but real powerful, probably my favorite and most dramatic feature, I think, from 2013, especially if you've done any corridor modeling where you've had several baselines or several separate corridors. The cross sections were always horrendous to create. Where we can see now it's just as quick as easy as dragging my sample line across my various corridor models and have it update the section view for me automatically. Pull it back down, grab the, so change the length, and get back to now just my single. All right, let me make sure that's it for the PowerPoint here. Yep, so that's the end of my presentation. Not bad, hair over an hour. I will open it up at this time. If there are any questions, feel free to type those into the Q&A panel down at the bottom of the GoToWebinar toolbar. If not, email them to me later on if something pops up. I will try to share them with everybody. I'd like to thank you for your time today, and hopefully you guys saw some new and compelling features that'll get you out of the 2011, get you off land desktop, get you into Civil 3D 2013. All right, not seeing any questions, so I think, hey, an hour is long enough. Again, thank you for your time today, and look forward to the next presentation that we do. Have a good afternoon. We'll talk to you later. Goodbye.